Hello. Today I'd like to talk with you about a spiritual diagnosis that fits each of us individually and a spiritual diagnosis of the United States of America. This is perfect timing after Donald Trump's speech last night to speak about a spiritual diagnosis of the USA. But more importantly and deeper than that is our individual consciousness and what we're contributing to the collective consciousness of the United States of America, and to the larger field of consciousness of humanity around the world, what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious, what Pierre Teilhard de Chardin called the noosphere. There's a field of consciousness that's affected by all of us. And the true crucial point right now is, are we in warrior consciousness? Are we in spiritual warrior consciousness? Or are we in victim consciousness? And hold on to the railings because we're in victim conscious, victim mode. Which one are we in? Which one are you in? Obviously, each one of us can only answer this question for ourselves individually, but we can learn to, once we learn to recognize these qualities of these different ways of consciousness in ourselves, then we can begin also to observe which kind of qualities we're seeing in others. So the key is getting out of victim consciousness. Why do I say that? Well, not only did Donald Trump masterfully present, I'm saying masterfully, you can take it however you want. Not only did Donald Trump masterfully present himself in victim consciousness last night, he thought he was in warrior consciousness, I believe. Oh, we're winning. We're great. America's great. US is great. You know, but Donald Trump epitomizes the victim consciousness. That's what he's spewing constantly. Oh, it's the Chinese fault. The Chinese ruined our elections. The Chinese are the threat. The Russians are the threat. All those people are the threat. And who's the victim? Oh, Donald Trump. Please start noticing this pattern in him because it is the root of a lot of his lower vibrational spiritual consciousness. Okay? Yes, there's a dishonesty. Yes, there's the inner wounded child in him. And we all need to love and care for the inner hurt little boy in Donald Trump. We do. That said, we all need to take responsibility for our own inner wounded child, and we all need to look at whether we're in victim consciousness, warrior consciousness, or spiritual warrior consciousness. Why do I say this, and how on earth did I learn about this? Well, the date was, I believe, May 25th, 2010. And I was in a stage of my life that was very challenging. And I'm seeking to shorten the story. There's so many beautiful stories in the background of this. But the essence of the story is, because life felt really, really, or seemed to be really, really challenging. But the day before, I'd finally just laughed and said, okay, God, I literally said, God, I don't use the God word very often anymore, but literally I said, God, you're going to have to do something because I don't know what to do about this situation. And the concrete situation was the bank wanted money and the IRS wanted money. And usually banks and IRS win, right? Sometimes the IRS compromises. Anyway, don't worry about that. That all worked out. There was no problem. None. Okay? My point is, instead of giving up in victim consciousness, I gave up and, okay, something good is going to come out of this. Trusting that. The next morning, so this is where we are on Tuesday, May 25th, 2010, I was meditating and it came to me what it means to be a spiritual warrior. Now, for me, this initially felt like a painful subject because I thought of macho new age guys and I had been in a relationship with one of them who was violent. Okay. So that's hard to admit on Substack, but it's important to know. I've been there, done that, in case you have as well, experienced that kind of relationship. My heart is with you. If you've been the perpetrator, I hope to meet you in heaven someday, when we're all in that state of consciousness where we no longer harm ourselves or others. Okay? And that's what this is all about, because we're seeing so much harm being done in the USA today. So much violence, so much harm. What's the root of it? Victim consciousness. So, what came to me is that being a spiritual warrior is never about fighting, never warfare, never killing. At least that's not the point of it. I'm not going to make judgments for you or tell you what to do or what not to do. But being a spiritual warrior is not about violence. It's not about fighting. And that fight starts in the mind when we perceive a threat and think of ourselves or someone else as a potential victim. When we're in that mode, threat, victim, we're in either victim consciousness or warrior consciousness. But a spiritual warrior is not doing that. Okay? A spiritual warrior is representing a higher power, the way a traditional warrior goes out to represent a government, a king, a dictator, whoever, or an idea. I know there are beautiful soldiers who've gone out to represent democracy, go make the world safe for democracy, and thank you for choosing that intention. And thank you for choosing the intention of protecting people. However, a spiritual warrior goes out to represent the higher power by whatever name. And that higher power is love, truth, peace, wisdom, bliss. Notice the peace. Notice the love. So going out as a spiritual warrior to represent the higher power, one goes in the energy of love, peace, bliss, and one stands against whatever comes one's way, not against in a confrontational way, but stands to represent the higher power in the presence of whatever comes one's way. So, bank and IRS, spiritual warrior mode. It's going to work out, stand strong, represent the higher power, trust the higher power, and it all worked out. Okay. I didn't perceive the bank and the IRS as a threat. I saw it as an opportunity for higher consciousness to work it out. And that's the key, is if we're seeking higher consciousness, we're not going to go into threat victim. Okay? We're going to go into spiritual warrior mode, which is peaceful. So peaceful spiritual warrior mode. And once this came to me that it's about standing strong in the face of whatever comes our way in order to represent the higher power, who is love, peace, bliss, wisdom, truth, well-being for all, the upholding of all creatures, to quote the fundamental dharma in the Book of Peace, Shantiparva, one of the Hindu books in the Mahabharata epic, the upholding of all creatures. That's not war, that's not violence. So being a spiritual warrior is going out to represent this higher power who's all about the upholding of all creatures. So when we become that, we draw on our own strength until we can no longer draw on that strength, and then we draw on the strength of the higher power, the love, peace, bliss, the field, the larger field of consciousness, the larger field of higher consciousness, which is energized with love and peace and bliss. And then we stand in the world and we do whatever needs to be done. We flow, we go, we rest, we stay, we stand, we do whatever's needed, we work to bring that love, peace, bliss manifestation for the well-being of all creatures of the world. That's what a spiritual warrior does. When I learned that, meditating that Tuesday morning in 2010, I became instantly aware that the spiritual warrior mode was the opposite of victim consciousness, and that I had become an expert, if you will, for decades in victim consciousness. That's a long story. And I realized that that move to laugh the day before, and there's a beautiful spiritual, mystical, spiritual story behind that as well. That's not just about me. Please, it's not just about me at all. None of this is about me. I just have to use some of my details to get the points across. So once I realized that I had been in victim consciousness and I was being invited to be in spiritual warrior consciousness, and that attitude of just laughing and trusting and being in joy, like the laughing Buddha. Just laugh. What do you think the laughing Buddha is about? Spiritual warrior consciousness. Not worrying, not being attached, rising above to this higher state of consciousness where we represent that by our very presence in the world. Well, once I did that, I experienced ascension. That's another story for another day. Maybe on Substack, maybe not on Substack. I've been telling a few people that story recently. And then my incredible experience of ascension happened 2 days later to a higher plane. And I'm very grateful for all the beings involved in those ascension processes. I'm very grateful to higher consciousness. I'm very grateful to you if you're listening this far. Because what I'm inviting us to see is whether or not we're in victim consciousness, warrior consciousness, which again is seeing threat, and we're the victim of the threat, whether we're blaming immigrants or whether we're blaming the Chinese or the Russians or whether we're blaming a sister, brother, cousin, neighbor, friend, whenever we're blaming the outer world for not showing up in a way that feels unthreatening to us or peaceful and loving to us, then we're going into either victim consciousness or warrior consciousness, and warrior consciousness fights back. That's a very limiting consciousness, and it's a huge part of the problem today. So is victim consciousness. The USA is replete with victim consciousness of, oh no, the immigrants, oh, the people of color, oh, the Muslims. That's all victim consciousness. Can you hear it? And each of us may have some little or big bits of victim consciousness in ourselves. For me, a lot of it had to do with being widowed. Okay? Bring that part of the story. Being widowed and raising my children by myself felt like, I remember one time I realized that virtually every day felt impossible. Virtually every day it felt impossible to do all the things I needed to do. And somehow, most or all of those things got done by the grace of higher consciousness. So spiritual warrior mode is something I had also learned to do. Get up, get going, get doing. And I got better at it probably with meditation. That's what I'm inviting you to do, is to learn to meditate in ways that help us rise up above all these things going on in the world. And yes, I want to name that there's a lot of warrior consciousness. A lot of the men who are leading in the US government right now are warrior consciousness. But underneath that, please remember there's that victim consciousness mode, because the warrior consciousness sees a threat and goes, oh, I could be a victim. No, I'm not going to be a victim. I'm going to fight back. So there's still that seed of victim consciousness in warrior mode because there's a belief in threats and victims. Spiritual warrior sees beyond that to the higher plane of consciousness that can transform even that warrior mode. And we have 3 men who've modeled this for us in history, whom I would like to highlight. Instead of this macho male fear-based, it is very fear-based way of governing that we're seeing in USA today. Violence comes out of fear, which is the victim consciousness element. Okay. They feel very powerful, which helps them overcome their fear. But that's that power. None of us own power. None of us are powerful in the sense of by ourselves being powerful. There's a source of all that power. We need to honor the source as the only one from whom power comes. We're not that. We are vessels. We are instruments of the power. And I say this as an energy healer. Energy healers have to realize they're not the healer. The healing energy comes through us. Yes, I'm very grateful for that. But this is about letting go. And as the old saying goes, letting God. But then going out and standing strong in the strength of the higher power. What we're seeing again in the US government is men doing warrior mode, victim consciousness, warrior mode, victim consciousness, fear, 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 and I'll add in dishonesty. I think that's pretty obvious to a lot of us. But that dishonesty goes with all of this. It comes out of fear, victim consciousness, and warrior consciousness, not spiritual warrior consciousness. So, who are the men who did spiritual warrior consciousness well and peacefully? Well, Buddha. Buddha left the palace as a prince to go out, Siddhartha left the palace as a prince to go out into the world because he saw aging people who looked sick and unwell and getting old, and he had been shielded from all that. So he went out into the forest, actually, not into the human made world, but into the forest to meditate and suffered massively. He became very emaciated. So he took on the burden of suffering for himself in order to seek how to liberate not only himself, but everyone else from suffering. Do you hear that spiritual warrior consciousness? The goal was to help everyone overcome, not even just to overcome suffering, but to rise out of that victim consciousness as part of suffering, to rise out of that into the higher consciousness in which there is no suffering. At least so I hear. And the little bits that I experience, I'm going to agree. That was Buddha's goal. Now, he did depend on I think it was a young woman who brought him a bowl of rice to feed him, and that's when he discovered the middle way. So he became a gentler spiritual warrior. He was not being gentle on his own body. It was as if his own body was the problem. Buddha discovered the middle way and became a peaceful, gentle spiritual warrior. Jesus, also known as Jesus Christ, or Yeshua, as I prefer to call him, because he is my friend. So Yeshua, before he went to the cross, or as he went to the cross, knowing that he was going to be crucified, he did not fight back. And there's so many Christians now in the USA who are like, kill the immigrants, kick them out, fight back, fight wars. I'm not saying this is everybody, but there's so many Christians with that attitude. And that is the opposite of Jesus' spiritual warrior approach in life. What came to me just yesterday is that it's not that Jesus was giving up. He didn't just give up and let people do to them what they willed. What Jesus did was to stay gentle. Jesus stayed gentle. Jesus stayed gentle all the way to the cross. That's what Jesus Christ modeled for you and me, because he was neither in victim consciousness nor warrior consciousness, but Jesus Christ was in spiritual warrior consciousness. He stayed strong, he stayed truthful, and he stayed gentle. That is why Yeshua is my true hero, among many other reasons. He lived his life gently. Well, there was the overturning of the temple, the money changers in the temple. We talked about that the last time at our spiritual gathering, and that's in the Substack post on Patanjali interpreting what Jesus did in terms of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Okay, so if you want to read about that part, why did he overturn the tables and get out of it? Please read that Substack post that has the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras in it, and the Metaphysical Book Study. Let's get to Mahatma Gandhi, the third man I want to hold up. And we could add a fourth, and I will in a moment, but definitely Mahatma Gandhi. Why? He was a true spiritual warrior because he went vulnerable. He did not only stay gentle, he led a whole peaceful revolution that ended up kicking out the British colonialists. How massively powerful is that? How did he do it? By becoming pure and vulnerable. And because Mahatma Gandhi not only stayed gentle, but became vulnerable, which is something these male macho men around the world do not want to do. They never want to feel vulnerable because then they don't feel powerful. But look at how powerful Mahatma Gandhi was. He led a revolution that kicked out the British colonists. You know, that's true power. The shift in consciousness when we stay gentle, peaceful, and go vulnerable. Jesus did that too. He stayed strong but vulnerable. And Mahatma Gandhi, when he stayed peaceful, strong because he was allowing himself to nearly starve to death, and vulnerable, everyone else became more peaceful, loving, calmer, and more vulnerable as well. Do you hear that whole cultural shift? It took one person to go to an extreme of being gentle, peaceful, and vulnerable, and the whole culture shifted. So what is the universe saying through me right now to the USA? Please stay calm, peaceful, vulnerable, and strong in your own way. This does not mean don't speak up. Mahatma Gandhi spoke out against the problems of the day. And I'll bring in the fourth person, the fourth man. I am focusing on men. Why? Not because I don't believe women are true spiritual warriors. I think we often are. I think we just haven't been allowed to see ourselves that way because culture tends to tell us women who we are, who we should be. You know, it's another subject. Let's get back to the men out there in the world who are doing all this macho man stuff. It seems like they're increasing the violence in the USA, but if we look back at Martin Luther King Jr., as I contemplated with sources input, the universal consciousness this morning, just what are we going to say about this? What came to me was Martin Luther King Jr. went out into the violence of America. I want you to hear that phrase again, the violence of America. Why? Because that violence has always been here in the past in America. It's always been here. Since its founding, the killing of Native Americans, taking land from indigenous peoples. It's always been here. And there's always been an othering of someone else in order to go into that violent mode instead of a peaceful, gentle vulnerability. That's the contrast that I want to emphasize. I hope I'm starting to emphasize it enough for everyone to get this. All right. So when Martin Luther King Jr. went out into the violence of America with the civil rights movement, leading it, he stayed peaceful, gentle, and vulnerable. I don't think he was always calm. I've seen a video where he's kind of watching, because he's literally his life was on the line. And if he heard popping sounds, he would startle. But he stayed peaceful, gentle, and vulnerable. And look at what Martin Luther King Jr. and all the people who are part of the civil rights group accomplished. Again, because he modeled this beauty of peaceful, gentle, vulnerable. That's the message for today. No longer being in victim consciousness, no longer being in warrior consciousness, but truly learning to live in spiritual warrior mode. The consciousness of a spiritual warrior, the intention and the strength of a spiritual warrior are all held together and maintained by representing the higher power, by staying peaceful, gentle, and vulnerable. May it be so. Thank you.